Hello and welcome. My name is Kathy Nathnagel, and I am the content manager here at GiveSmart by Community Brands. And my team and I, are thrilled to have each of you here joining us in conversation today. During this episode, we are going to share some anecdotal examples and some data that demonstrates just how valuable donor segmentation is for sustaining your mission and making your jobs or really helping you work smarter rather than harder. Joining me today are two of my team members who are in day-to-day conversations with nonprofits of all sizes from across the country. Brandy and Patrick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Perfect. And before we kind of dig in, we are going to do a poll. Now, this poll is the one that we have been doing for a while, at least through this year. So when you think about your 2020 and the campaigns that you are planning, are you planning all virtual campaigns for 2021? I think I said 2020 before. Why would I do that? 2021, are you looking at all hybrid campaigns, some virtual and some live, all in-person campaigns, or are we feeling a little unsure? And while everyone is answering, Brandy, I know to kind of kick us off or get us thinking about donor segmentation. I know one segment that people look at often is kind of the generation or the age that people kind of fall into. And I know you had a little bit of insight from a study you've looked at recently, correct?
Yeah. We actually did a study that matched up some of the donor expectations with event planner expectations to better understand, where there's alignment between how organizations plan events and what they include in those events and what donors are really looking for. And we know from that information, that study, that donor demographics, especially age group, as you called out, truly influence how they engage with organizations. So in our research, what we found in trying to understand how and why donors want to give or attend those events, it's really clear that there are different preferences and needs across generations. So for example, millennials and Gen X donors are much more likely to attend events than baby boomers. But across all three generations, what we also saw is that they're interested in events that offer dinner and dancing. So long story short, there's unique kind of considerations, preferences based on even just age group. And spoiler alert, this is really why segmenting is important, just to understand those different audiences, how to message them, how to engage them and meet their needs and interests.
Absolutely. And that spoiler alert is definitely kind of setting up what the rest of today is going to look like. But let's go ahead and look at the poll results first. And I know, Patrick, we've been doing this poll together for several months now, and this looks about, I think, what we would have expected. There seems to be a shift a little bit in having people kind of do a little bit of everything.
No, absolutely. I think it's been a fun evolution and kind of on par with what we're seeing, where I think it is people who, based on geography and other variables, are starting to be able to do some live elements. And I think especially in the summer, whether it's golf events or drive-ins or some of those things, taking advantage of outdoor. But I think seeing that they're always, we'll talk a little bit about as we go here, but keeping in some of the virtual or hybrid elements is definitely also a trend that we're seeing continue as time progresses.
Absolutely. And so with that, let's dig into what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to talk a little bit initially about kind of what donor segmentation really is. Why is it something we should be considering? And what do we kind of know based on like market behavior and consumer behavior? And we'll take a brief look at some segment considerations and why, again, this is so important to do. We'll talk a little bit about strategy. So how can you use the tools that you have in order to really have a thoughtful plan to better do donor segmentation? We're going to talk a little bit about how you can influence or communicate. So what are some things you can do if you have a segment that you're working with? And then we'll have some time for questions. So please ask questions as we go along. There's a question box for you to do so. And then there's also a chat function. So I know we're going to be sharing some resources in the chat, some additional things that you can use kind of as you're considering this donor segmentation planning, and both are being monitored. So please ask as we go along so that we'll have time for them at the end. And to answer the most common question, which is this being recorded? Will we get the recording? Absolutely. Everyone who signed up, so everyone who's listening today will receive the recording after today's session, basically as fast as I can get it up on YouTube, and we'll go from there. So, why does donor segmentation matter? And as Brandy said, spoiler, it does. And it's something that we need to look at. So when we talk about donor segmentation in general, what we're talking about is taking a look at your donor base, and that could be from one campaign or one event. It could be looking at something annually or looking at something lifetime, and saying, what buckets can we kind of put people in? How can we categorize so that um, we can be more strategic in the way that we're communicating with them, be more strategic in the things that we're inviting them to, be more strategic in the messaging that we're providing, and really hone in on people's interests and behavior, so that we can better steward them. So with that, I know, Brandy, you had a little bit of insight into donor behavior, and why it's something we need to consider.
Sure. And I think this is a great point, just to take a broader look at segmentation and thinking about personalization. So thinking even outside of the nonprofit space, in recent studies, one in particular we're thinking about from University of Texas, we know that there's research behind personalization and how we prefer personalization as consumers, because it gives us as consumers a little bit of control back, which we really prefer. And personalization also helps eliminate some of that information overload. So when we think about control, we perceive a personalized list of things, let's say, suggestions for things that you might like or may have been related to purchases you've made on sites like Amazon. That gives us a sense of control. It's tailored to our interests. We feel like we have decided and therefore are in control of our experience. When in reality, behind the scenes, it's technology, it's an algorithm that's really deciding that for us. And even though that kind of component doesn't matter as much, the false sense of control absolutely influences our buying. So even though we know it's an algorithm, it is shortening some of the decision-making process for us. It's tailored to our preferences. And a tailored list of anything, resources, things we might want to buy, topics of interest based on our internet browsing or streaming history, that reduces noise for us. Think about all the information overload we're kind of facing every day in the media and social media. This helps us focus and have a more tailored experience. If you go into a library, for example, and you walk to a section that you're interested in to find a book to borrow, that's a great example of where you're kind of directing your own experience, but not everything is organized that way. So we really thrive when we have limited choices. There's a little bit more structure and organization for us, but it's important that those items are also desirable and of interest to us. And so those same principles should apply to donor behavior, and they do. We've seen this in our research. And when we think about what donor segmentation is specifically, it's truly the process by which donors are grouped based on specific characteristics, behaviors, such as frequency, recency of gifts, reasons for giving, interests, other demographic information. We mentioned generations and age groups earlier, with the goal of improving communications, providing information, and reaching out to those groups based on what's important to them, based on those characteristics, with the ultimate goal to increase engagement and retention, to build relationships over time. What we've also seen is that there's a ton of opportunity by tapping into those needs and preferences, by practicing segmentation. So a recent report from Camber Collective suggested that charities could tap into as much as $47 billion in new and redirected giving just by better meeting donor needs and preferences. $47 billion, that's an intimidating number. And I know that donor segmentation is also intimidating and a time investment, but what we'll talk through more today is just really how important it is on the horizon for the nonprofit space and just trends that we're seeing with our partners. It's really important that nonprofits really consider how to start segmenting, refining their donor segmentation strategy, because there's money being left on the table, and it's a really good opportunity to start small to see big results. And so, Patrick, can you share a little bit more about trends we're seeing?
No, absolutely. And I think the nice part, as we go through this, I think you just made a great point, which is there is no magic formula to all of this. And 47 billion is quite a large figure. And I think for every organization don't be intimidated by the depth to which you could go. And I think, especially talking about kind of more into the points of why does this matter? I think like so many of you listening, you've done extraordinary things for your communities over the last 12 to 18 months. And while that was more forced behavior, to put it mildly, I think that, we've seen some very encouraging things, that things are circling back towards what we all collectively remember as normal. And I know in a philanthropy.com article that I believe we'll share with everybody, experts were predicting pre-pandemic giving returns, kind of going back to normal by the end of this year. And in our own data set through GiveSmart, I feel confident of those predictions because we saw that the month of May 2021 was the most successful month of giving since early February of 2020. So I think what's nice, in terms of a timing perspective and looking at this information and how to really optimize the data that you have on hand as you look at the remainder of the year, or if you're starting the fiscal year on July 1st, timing is good. And there's a quote from an article written by Joan Gary, who's the founder of the nonprofit Leadership Lab, that's resonated with me as I was thinking about the call today. And it's a quote from Jared Bell, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, and talks about the mission critical importance of technology is something that the for-profit sector has figured out a long ago. The nonprofit sector as a whole has been about 8 years behind in that regard. Technology has always been viewed at a cost, but this past year has helped to accelerate our collective journey to get where a for-profit is, which is that technology isn't about strategic enablement, it's the key to survival of the organization. And I think, the main reason that resonates with me is we're seeing a lot of people leverage the information at their disposal. And through the first 5 months of this year, we're actually seeing growth compared to 2019. So pre-pandemic, we've seen about a 7% growth in the number of campaigns that organizations are running, and 102% growth in the percentage of customers who are running multiple campaigns, which is mind-boggling to think, but I think it represents we're taking the learned behaviors that while they were forced from the last year and putting that to use, because a lot of the campaigns that people are doing in terms of these additional fundraisers beyond just a signature gala or golf event are more micro campaigns that are more targeted and more segmentation based, and we're going to cover a large part of them. But I think, in particular, the competition for fundraising dollars, is an all-time high. And I think especially in the fall of this year and going into next year. And so from a timing perspective, now is the best time to maximize that potential and find ways for your organization to tap into that 47 billion. And I think that, as we look at the ones on screen here, there's a million different ways that you can segment and explore. And even I know Brandon, Kathy, and I were hypothesizing, and our best advice is just to start with one and not try to necessarily boil the ocean and more so go incrementally. But, I think more than anything, the one thing that we point out is 47 billion matters, and getting ahead of the competition in terms of other nonprofits in your area. And, the competition for donor engagement is the more you can start to do now and make it personalized. I'm thinking about the last thing that I bought, and now I realize I had a false sense of controlling it, which I don't know how I feel about, but I think finding the ways to target people now so that you can make the most of the rest of your calendar, I think is excited to jump into.
Absolutely. And, I liked what you said. I think often, or I shouldn't say I liked it, but you talked about how this upcoming fall, because everything's wrapping up so quickly and everyone is kind of, open again and feels more that things are going to be happening at a record pace, that there's going to be a lot of noise, there's going to be a lot out there. And so there is an opportunity to re-engage your donors. And that's another segment too, right? There was that kind of listed like roll out your org. So maybe they had done your walk program for a really long time, or your endurance training program, or had done a 5K, but you've never considered inviting them to your gala or things like that. So when you think of donor life cycle and you think of all those things, it is important to try to reestablish some relationships that maybe because we couldn't be together face to face, we now have the opportunity to really level set and get ready, reestablish and get re-engaged with people so that moving forward, you can all have success. So we were curious, and I guess we talk about hypothesizing, but we were curious kind of what stage everyone is in with their donor segmentation. So I did put up another poll if you want to take an answer, because we're just I'm curious, kind of what our audience makeup is today. See, here we are segmenting you. But as Brandy mentioned, donor segmentation can feel very intimidating. And as Patrick had mentioned, there's a lot of segments to consider. I mean, truly, you could make bucket after bucket after bucket, and you could have two buckets get combined. And it's not helpful to look at 18 different categories or 87 different categories and try to even that out. And the reality is, how much data really is too much data. Do you want, again, those 87 different segments? No. You want to start with one thing and do it right, and then learn and move forward. So we are going to be sharing a few different campaigns and tell you a little bit about them, tell you how donor segmentation played a role in their success or played a role in kind of their planning. And with the intention is that it's something that you could replicate on your own. So of course, if we're talking about a school, think about if that makes sense for you, if you're not a school, et cetera. And again, the intention is that, or something that we do want everyone to consider, is that most, bigger to major donors started with a $50 or $100 donation, right? Like in general, people aren't walking into your organization having never worked with you before giving you $1,000 or $2,500. Are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. If they're brought in by the right person, absolutely. I'm not questioning that. But most of them are brought into the fold at a lower level. Well, likely when they give that lower level donation, they have the opportunity to give more, but they're seeing what your organization does. How are they being thanked? And not necessarily consciously doing so, but if they feel appreciated, if they feel talked to in a personal way, if they feel like they mattered as individuals, just like in any relationship that we have, they're going to be more likely to continue engagement. So we are going to start by looking at some campaigns, but before we do, I wanted to share this poll so that everyone feels good about it, that everybody is kind of in that not yet started, that initial development stage. I mean, that's a fair majority of all of you who are listening today. And so hopefully, again, the goal is to have one takeaway, one thing that you can do and plan out and be thoughtful with so that you can have sustainable success moving forward. So with that, Patrick, I think you're going to kick us off.
I am. And the people who answered, they have solid strategy that is working, please feel free to send in some of those things that are working. We'll be happy to relay to others. And I jokingly refer to that because this example that we're starting with from Melbourne Preparatory School based out of Pennsylvania is one that they kind of stole, for lack of a better phrase, from another organization. And so I think this is kind of the evolution of some other ideas, but more than anything, what I like about it is the phrase money talks is I think one of the most common phrases ever, but it applies to our conversation today because buyer donor behavior is a clear way that people put their priorities on display. So as a part of their overall virtual gala that they had held just a few weeks ago at the end of April, Melbourne Prep included this a voting competition they called their Cocktails for Corridas contest, where what they did is for various departments within the school, such as extracurricular activities, sports teams, things of that nature, is they set up a vote option and kind of in it, and you can see some of the examples here that we'll share with folks. So you can go to their page to view it, is they kind of had people do clever videos or stuff like this, and just great engagement, I think, overall, especially when we can't all be in person. They did a great job of doing that. But in addition to making some competition internally within the institution, it also created a record of interest for everyone who supported these groups. So in addition to knowing, hey, who won, I think we've seen schools do this in particular, but it's not just exclusive to that space, where now if I supported the swimming and diving team, do they have a fundraiser that's coming up? Or, hey, are they going to competition? Now I know who's directly related to those interests. And, for whatever your type of organization you might have, how can you use, some of your fundraising efforts to create this data that you can then segment after the fact? And I think that's what they did, a great job of. That not only did they get some valuable information that could be used in a myriad of ways going forward for other things, but they were able to generate some revenue as a part of it. And I think that aspect of, how can you work smarter, not harder, is something that they did a great job of. And I think what's cool is the organization that they had kind of taken this voting idea from was from something we showcased, and it was an organization that I can't remember. It was somewhere in the healthcare space. So couldn't be farther away, but I think showing that, what's nice is take some of the perspectives of things that you've seen and find ways to make it unique. And they made it unique to their organization and were able to do some cool things with it, which I think is something that, again, everybody can go ahead and do, because it gives you the opportunity to engage your constituent base, but then also obtain some valuable information that then you can use to create that more personalized outreach and engagement going forward, not for just overall fundraising, but if you break it into some of these segmented groups, the drama department is coming on something great. They have a list that they can engage with and go, which I think is a great outcome of it.
Brandy, take it away.
All right. So another way that you should really think about segmenting your donors is looking at their giving history, amount, frequency. All of that giving behavior is a gold mine. And you should have reporting in your fundraising system that really makes capturing that donation history easy to review, just to understand. And if you don't feel like you've got good insight there, what you could do is really start with one event, track progress with those donors. We know that this is a learning opportunity for many of you, especially those starting out with segmentation or trying to get stronger with your data. So fine-tuning your strategy is often necessary in just developing a plan that makes sense to you. So completely understandable. What's really important here is that donors have explicitly said that 2 of their primary reasons for not giving again are that 1, they didn't know what the nonprofit was using the money for, and 2, they didn't feel appreciated or thanked. So if you take nothing else away today, those are 2 things that are really, really critical and also within your control and easy to correct. So sharing a power of your gift or donation impact infographic like you see here is a really great way to tie impact to those donations. So it helps potential donors understand what you're doing in a much more tangible way. It's just so much more relatable. And I think it appeals so much to our empathy and makes donors feel much more connected to your mission. And also offering and communicating a recurring gift option opens the door for those people to give and gives you the ability to tie that yearly total to some specific mission deliverables. As you can see here, you're really highlighting, this org has highlighted how your recurring gift is really helping provide basic needs assistance to residents in a specific area. So that's a great example as well of just showing how not just a one-time gift, but potentially a recurring gift can keep them connected and contributing to that impact on an ongoing basis. And as we've said before, people really tell us a lot with their spending habits, right? A donation campaign that heavily highlights mission deliverables and offers opportunity for recurring donations gives you insight to segment from the get-go. Recurring donors are arguably much more invested in your organization. And with a campaign like this, as you can see here, it's important to thank those donors specifically as well, and send follow-up information on those mission updates throughout the year so that they understand what's happening with your organization over time and they continue to feel that connection. And we know more than anything that nonprofit staff are under an immense amount of pressure. And it seems in some ways that you're pressured to communicate without an ask. And sometimes it's hard. It feels to share mission information and also make an ask for donation. But as is the case with any relationship, those mission updates that are not asking for donations, they will pay off in the long run with the right segment. What's important is that you are communicating your mission deliverables from the onset to create that informed, engaged donor from the beginning. So those are really important considerations, just as you're thinking about communicating impact, not just once, but on an ongoing basis. And then another great example of how you can really start building towards segmentation is thinking about how you're setting up your order forms. So this is a great example of where you can create some easily identifiable segments on how you're creating order forms. So it's probably obvious that individual tickets and tables are a clear thing to include. That's, pardon the pun, but table stakes, some of these order forms. But if you're considering, if you think about a VIP table, for example, if you've got a concierge or bar cart included and premier seating near your stage, those donors and packaging up that segment are more likely to bid on a live auction or do a paddle raise. So share those live auction items in advance to that group. Share mission information as though you're stewarding a major donor, because that group purchasing at that level are a potential major donor. They have more of a propensity to give. So ask them questions about, what types of alcohol or cocktails they would like to see on the bar cart. Start those conversations from the beginning at the onset of the purchase where you're beginning that engagement with them. And we all make assumptions. Don't assume that your board of trustees have all of the information about your mission, about your impact handy. Don't assume that they are able to articulate everything that you can, knowing that you've been doing that outreach and you're representing the mission in many other communications. Depending on the event or the campaign, you might also consider adding in a membership option or an additional level of giving. So if you have a membership program, those folks are more likely to be reliable, ongoing, dependable supporters. So treat them that way. Members can be assigned to a staff member. They maybe could get a special visual at an event, like a glow bracelet or a ribbon that sets them apart and makes them feel special. And then that way, every staff, every volunteer person knows that those individuals are engaged with the organization at a deeper level. They're a deeper level volunteer or supporter, and they can receive special treatment and be prepped to be a little bit more special at the event. So again, just thinking about limited opportunities that we have, it's important to maximize those opportunities to gather and create personal face-to-face relationships where you can. So taking that time now at the outset in your order forms and how you're setting up the event to segment and target certain donor pools will ensure and help set the stage for your next in-person event to maximize those opportunities and build relationships.
Before we get into reporting, I was going to say, I really liked, I always say that present Kathy is really grateful for past Kathy and sometimes not so much. But I'm a big proponent of do things to set yourself up for success in the future. So the idea of doing, I loved what you said about order forms and setting up your ticketing so that people self-select to give you more and say I want to be a VIP, but I'm willing to spend more. And they're telling you something from the onset, or what Patrick said, that if you segment giving opportunities through voting or something like that, that you are basically doing the segmentation work that can feel intimidating, like we've mentioned from the onset, to say these people want to know about this sports team or this initiative or this whatever. And it helps guide the conversations that you'll have with them moving forward. And I know Patrick has a lot to say about reporting because it is his jam. So I'll kick it over to him.
It is. It's an area that we could go into for hours, and then we recently did on a blueprint episode that if you want to nerd out a bit, you can please feel free to. But as we look at reporting and building on some of the real world campaign examples that we showed in the past couple of slides here, is the topic of how to find data and gather it versus how to leverage it. There's two very different hows, and so certainly asking what works for our audience and doing surveys or asking around whether it's board volunteers, it can lead to a whole lot of rabbit holes with a high degree of subjectivity versus similar to letting people self-select and doing that where it is a little bit more apparent. Is objectively you can find what resonated the most if you kind of just change your perspective. And so I think we could go into it for days, but the couple of ones that in recent conversations with different nonprofits that have resonated is, looking at the performance of items and what can I solicit for the future and how do I know what resonates? And we did a whole bunch of data from it, but I think, the reports that we put a box here on the top items. So if you have things and you've kind of categorized them or grouped the items, so you could know that, for example, travel packages resonate with our constituent base more so than, sports tickets or things like that. And so being able to look at, okay, what items received the most amount of unique bids, but also what if Patrick and Brandy just got head to head and we got real competitive as we tend to do? Is that really something that's indicative of your entire constituent base compared to an item that maybe had the most amount of people bid, or there was a lot of people who watched it, but the price got out of it? And so using the information that isn't even, kind of shared, but through the different reporting means, and this is just, an example of one of the streams, or looking at, potentially who placed a bid but didn't win. And so being able to show that, hey, those are individuals who were engaged and they were trying to provide support financially to your organization. The way the night went just didn't go in their favor, but a targeted, personalized outreach directly to them is a way, where if they do have a budget that wasn't spent, does that give you a gift opportunity and an ask and engagement opportunity to, not only foster the relationship, but potentially increase the revenue streams at the same time? And, because it's such a broad area, I think the one of the things that I always recommend to people is make sure you know what questions you're trying to answer before you go down the route of trying to look at it, because otherwise it can be a little bit overwhelming. And I think as well, incorporating various departments. So, whether it's your development and marketing teams or other things, because each group might have a subset of data information that they're going to find interesting that could be of value. And, as we see, a lot of people find value in some different things such as Google Analytics, and where does our marketing spend from a social perspective, where are we getting the most impressions, and incorporating that, and being able to extract from that, if it's Facebook versus LinkedIn, does that tell you something about the demographic of your constituent base? So I think making sure that wherever possible, in each organization obviously is structured, but the more that your teams could do to remove some of those internal silos will help optimize these segmentation strategies. And especially if you're somebody who's trying to get it off the ground or running into some hiccups, that's more than anything, I think getting the cross-functional visibility will help accelerate the process and hopefully get you to start realize some of the benefits sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And I think I liked what you said about what kind of got the most bids, because or had the most bidders, because let's say you had a live auction item that was a certain type of travel item, or you had a live auction item that was fill your wine cellar or instant wine cellar, and you had three people kind of going for it. That's three people who were interested in donating anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 to your organization, but only one could win. So those other two people have the means, were of interest, and just lost out. So how can you engage them? Do you have other events that are coming up that are focused around wine? And I know that's like looking at a group of three, but when we compare that to when you look at your whole catalog, and I loved what you said about kind of remove those silos, which is hard. But it's important, because you might say, listen, someone was at this event, they seemed really interested. They didn't fall on our radar because they ended up not spending money because they lost out or whatever, but they would be a good fit for your event, or they would be a good fit for your campaign, or they're someone we should really reach out to for Giving Tuesday and solicit personally. And these are the reasons why. I mean, that's where it's donor segmentation. That's on a very micro level. But that's where donor segmentation can really start to help have you benefit, and has you working with the group in front of you to kind of maximize their potential. And that's, again, working smarter, not harder is the way to go. So as we kind of look ahead of ways that you can influence donor engagement, as we just saw, looking at those campaigns, hopefully there was something that you could replicate. It's hard to kind of say this is what's going to work for you and your organization in every instance, because that's just not how donor segmentation works. But hopefully there was something you saw that you can replicate kind of at your own event, and that you revisit those segment suggestions that we gave at the beginning. So demographics, and Patrick talked about how you can find them if you don't have someone's birthday. Donor interest, the frequency that they donated, the amount that they donated, one time and lifetime, the role in the organization. Are they a volunteer and they've never given before? Are those groups that you can, do a special messaging to? Are they people who gave to one type of event or campaign that you've sunset? So how do you transition them into something else? Are they people who had a lot of interest in one certain type of item, and then what can you do with them? I mean, like I said, there's a lot of different options, but hopefully as you revisit those segments that we shared at the beginning, you can start to see where you could create a really viable plan for your organization, and to at least get things started. Because like we've said a few times over, it's a time investment that can pay off in a very big way if you do it right. And, there are some simpler communication strategies, perhaps batch personalization, that we can look at to adjust kind of maybe some current campaigns that you have, to say this is a good way to kind of start helping to identify those donor segments, or helping to communicate to people's kind of specific interest. If you're just looking at your next year or your next calendar year or fiscal year and saying like, this is what we kind of have baked as our plan. So how can we segment with what we have? And so with that, Patrick, I think you're going to kick us off here too.
I am, and this example from an organization called Camp One Step, which is based out of the Greater Chicagoland area, is their Given Tuesday example that we have here is something I found myself referring to quite a bit when trying to provide some examples to organizations and want to share with this audience as well, where they took an existing campaign, Giving Tuesday, and they used it to really meet donors where they were at. And so whether it's a similar donation campaign and annual fund membership, I think the applications are quite broad to it. But what they did is they had different kind of profiles or segments that had specific asks. So some of the folks were heavily directed to more of a membership driven campaign. Some were driven to more of just a straight monetary ask. And what they did is they really gave people the ability to kind of self-select based upon their own giving levels and their own kind of experience. So rather than just have one Giving Tuesday campaign, they had created 2 or 3 of them because as part of their subscription, there's no limit to the amount of campaigns. So they were able to still all raise funds. The funds all went to the same account, but they created some specific campaigns to more target people to grow into the monthly giving campaign and kind of create that more long-term donor, as opposed to giving people more of a transactional aspect if they wanted that. And so I think, similar to a lot of things that we talked about is, giving people those options and, doing some segmentation. And Kathy, I think you had mentioned it where, using your lists and special people and certain people don't need to be on every outreach, but by creating it where, hey, we'd love for you to be involved with this and spread the word. Now, in addition to increasing your revenue streams, you've also had a touch point that is people more fondly than just a generic email. And so I think this is just one of many examples where, they took something they were going to do. They didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but they just got a little bit more strategic about it in a way that was able to bring in some good results.
No, I loved that. And I loved, again, we're all talking about strategy and plan, and that's hard, but I think it is so important. I mean, we've talked about noise and everything that we're hearing, that it's just so important to say, I'm going to own this relationship and I'm going to take it from start to finish. And I'm going to, doesn't mean that the specific donor can't receive your newsletter. It means that, if they're my donor, I'm going to forward it on to them and say, this is something I really think you'd like to hear because you noticed they had an interest in a past event or a past campaign. So it's really just saying, I'm paying attention to what you're doing. I'm paying attention to the things that you've told me you like, and I'm providing you information that's helpful. And it doesn't mean that you have to rework every single wheel. And I know, Brandy, you're going to kind of wrap us up a little bit on the content before we get to questions on, how can you kind of bring your mission forward, or what are things you can do to highlight your mission so that those who are probably the most interested in your organization for organization's sake are being thoughtfully communicated with.
Sure. And we wanted to pull this example forward because we thought My Friend's Place just had a really good example of mission forward content here. So they held a campaign which included some panels of discussions around their mission and other mission focused topics. So they really put the work that they did for young Black and homeless populations on display, made it very forward facing. And they gave an opportunity to bring stories forward with someone sharing their personal experiences, some visuals, and offering up that storytelling that in this virtual world, this virtual hybrid world, is sometimes missing or lost. Just spending, in person, we have so much more opportunity to share stories and really connect person to person. So this was a great example of a campaign where they actually brought that forward and made that the focus. So if you have people who are coming to your mission focused event, we really recommend that you think of it as the first chapter of your relationship with those people. And so just thinking about how you engage with them, the sharing of information, the sharing of stories, it doesn't need to be high production, high cost, but it's really a great opportunity to share those video messages, to follow up in a personalized way through things like handwritten thank you notes or even phone calls, handwritten cards, just to really acknowledge those attendees and donors personally outside of their relationship with your organization. So just more food for thought there as you're thinking about how to build those relationships. This is a really great way to set that foundation.
Absolutely. And I liked what you said kind of about building the relationship. Put something on your calendar, and that's, I mean, again, past Kathy sometimes have to tell present Kathy what to do, but build out blocks on your calendar to say, this is my thank you note writing time. Maybe that means that you're not going to get to everybody on your list that you wanted to, but you're dedicating some time to do it. I liked what you said about acknowledging donors outside of their relationship with your organization. So, looked at their LinkedIn and see if they won an award, or see if their company had a really great quarter, or whatever that may look like, or their kids' school, had won the state whatever tournament, and acknowledge them as people, because that is such an important piece. And I know from my experience, the more that I was genuine and thoughtful in doing those things, people came back to me, or we saw an increase in donation, or we saw an increase in engagement, we saw an increase in those things. And it makes, of course, perfect sense. It's a time investment, but if every time you talk to, no one likes a friend that's always asking them for something. So I think donor segmentation really says we need to treat these people as people, and genuinely and authentically develop and steward those relationships so that we can maximize kind of their interest, and really make sure that they're an invested, engaged, returning donor. So before we get to questions, again, we want to say, is it possible to do it all? No. Boil the ocean? Not possible. And if you tried, you would not succeed. So consider one or two of those things that you could do well. Consider one or two of those campaigns that you could replicate. Consider, saying, I'm going to pull these 20 donors and I'm going to make sure to reach out to them quarterly about things that aren't about our mission or our fundraising. Whatever those kind of takeaways are for you, because donor segmentation is so personal, please just give it a try. And as a reminder, everyone's going to receive the recording, and there's going to be a survey after this. Believe it or not, we do look at the survey results, and we do try to tailor our content moving forward based on kind of some of your desires and wants. So I think, as Patrick had mentioned, we do have a fundraising success blueprint series. It is a deep dive into specific elements of fundraising that are just really, really, really important to talk about. So our next one is this Thursday, June 10th at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and it talks about live streaming the program. And then we have other ones coming along the way, and I know we're going to share the sign up link in the chat. And now we're going to move over to questions. And I think Brandy, there was a question about how do you go about gathering kind of that relevant data. I know Patrick highlighted it, but Brandy, I think you would have some additional insight there, perhaps.
Yeah. I think, Patrick gave a great overview of just the value of reporting. And so I would definitely say that's a great place to start. Just looking at historical donation, event, even if it's an auction bidding history, is a great way to understand your donors a little bit more, and kind of, maybe their propensity to give, and also where their interests are. I think Kathy mentioned even looking at volunteer signups, looking at donor behavior to see who attended events but maybe didn't give. One area that I really love to reiterate with organizations looking to fundraise and not being very solid or strategic about segmentation yet, maybe feeling like you don't have good data integrity or you're missing information. Surveys are so valuable. And I think oftentimes organizations are hesitant, gun shy to send out surveys because they feel like they are over messaging or over communicating to donors. This is a great way to reach out to donors, ask them questions about their program interests, what type of activities or events they would like to see, and also flesh out data points that you may not have. For example, in the past, I've heard some hesitation from development staff on asking for donors' ages. And so you may not have a good understanding of your donor demographics and age groups in your donor database and your fundraising lists. This is a great opportunity to ask even, broad questions such as which demographic or age group would you self-identify as? You have an opportunity to ask them some information, make them feel engaged and like they're a part of driving some of your calendar of events, that you're listening, that you're concerned about better understanding them and making sure that they're getting the right information at the right time. So don't be afraid to ask questions in a survey. There's a lot of gold that can come out of those conversations and those responses.
Absolutely. No,
And one
I,
thing
oh yeah, go ahead,
I'd
Patrick.
add on to it with it is, and I think we've seen a lot of people do this very well, especially of late, is tying those surveys, going back to Brandy's point of sharing the impact. The best time that we've seen people do those surveys, be it, email, text messaging, whatever the case might be, is when you have a captive audience and doing it while it's kind of fresh on their mind, so to say. And so using, kind of a post-event follow-up outreach to say, hey, thanks for your support, we were able to raise X, or the money is going to be able to fund, A, B, and C internally within the organization, and kind of using that as a way to gather the feedback, which is kind of something that you want from them, but tying it into their impact and showing them is something that we've seen, and a lot of people have reported that when they've changed the timing to be more kind of right after while the experience is fresh, and they've gotten better feedback. So that was just the only thing I think to optimize the survey from a timing perspective.
For sure. No, and those are all considerations that people, sometimes it is just a very, and that's kind of hopefully what one of your takeaways today is that it can be a very small switch to get a much greater return. So it doesn't have to be, a giant undertaking. And I think that that's a perfect example, Patrick. This is for either of you. What do you think of donor segmentation for more specific appeals to donors who give through employer payroll giving? We have people who give through workplace giving, but we don't necessarily solicit them other ways. And I know this has come up a few times that you don't even necessarily have all the information. We would like to solicit them for company matching gifts. Is that something you would suggest?
I can chime in there. I do think there's a lot of opportunity here, and we, as I'm sure many people on the call have seen, lots of opportunity just in missed donation opportunities with corporate matching, because a lot of organizations feel like it's just a heavy lift to really facilitate those conversations. There's often forms involved on the company side to approve those employee matching gifts, but there is so much opportunity that you should not lose sight of it. And I think a campaign that's targeting employees at a specific company who supports a matching gift program is a great idea, especially if you've got a record of employees and you know which individuals work at that organization. It also, I think, helps build some engagement at the workplace level. So if you're, targeting those potential donors, you're sharing your mission, you're tying it back to their company profile. I think what's important is that you can also use that as a way to build up a relationship and a pipeline in a way for corporate giving and a conversation with that employer at a more strategic level. So you're showing groundswell, the more adoption interest you can drive with those donors at a particular company. So I would definitely encourage thinking about how you can engage them. Maybe there's something about your mission that aligns well with that company's mission. And obviously, if you've got kind of a grouping of employees at an organization who are giving, there may be some common interests or some programs that align well with your organization. So you could also reach out to those donors to better understand, what's so compelling about their giving to your organization, knowing that they're working at that particular company. So I definitely would encourage exploring that more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then we have two more. One I think is more will be a quick answer. So that's why we're doing two more. So someone asked how we've wanted to do donor segmentation and kind of create that process and that workflow for a long time, but we're just a small shop. So how would you recommend starting?
That is, I think it's a great question. And the every adventure starts with the first step. And so, my recommendation would be to start with what information do we have available to us today? Regardless if it's in 15 different places, I would start with kind of a checklist, so to say, of what information do we have today that we know has a high degree of data integrity to it. And then conversely, kind of once you get that list and you look at it, what isn't there that would be helpful would kind of be the next. But I think starting with what do you have available today, and also what would you like to do with it, and kind of going through that and just seeing what you have and go from there. But definitely I know we regard the name of the person who asked it, and I'll be happy to follow up with you to learn a little bit more, because I think each organization is going to be unique. But I think, starting with what do you have available, and then also I think it's a great way to depending upon who is in your greater community. So be it board members, volunteers, things of that nature. If you do happen to have anybody who has a little bit of, analytical experience or stuff like that, and maybe instead of providing a gift can offer their expertise, is another way, especially for smaller organizations, to kind of help spread the burden a little bit, and potentially get some other folks involved and not just put the weight all on yourself.
Absolutely. And, I think a logical place to start is a frequency of giving and amount of giving. And to Patrick's point, that might be living in 17 different places and spreadsheets that were created by people 3 years ago. But that'll give you a good place, because I think often we don't necessarily appreciate people who gave multiple times if they gave through multiple different avenues. So they did a volunteers golf outing, and then they did, our annual giving campaign, and then they bought an auction item at our virtual event, but we didn't sell tickets. So we didn't necessarily capture that from that onset. And it can be some work. There's no question that that's true, but that it is a good place to start. And then you can choose a sample of those people and do a little bit of work and see how it works and see how it grows. Because you got to start somewhere, to Patrick's point. And the last question I have, which is very tactical, and then don't forget about that survey, is that how did someone make that mission kind of event that you were talking about, Young, Black, and Homeless, happen on the GiveSmart platform? And I can answer that if that makes sense. So on GiveSmart, you can create as many campaigns as you want. Once you have your subscription, you can do as many things as you want, which is why, to Patrick's point, when we said we saw an increase in campaigns, people had the creativity and the opportunity to create these, campaigns that weren't necessarily goaled at raising $500,000 or $300,000. They were goaled at, we're going to segment and see what we can learn about this group of people. And so the raise might have been, 5,000 or 6,000, but it's a 5,000 or 6,000 we weren't expecting, and it's something we can build off of. So on the Mission First side, they just created a campaign in GiveSmart. Again, they can do an unlimited amount, and then they streamed the video, which you can kind of embed that code and put it in there. And I know in that case, with their mission events and with several other organizations that have done mission panels or kind of speaking like that frame of event, so fundraising kind of second, mission first, even without doing an ask, but having the donate button available, I think in all instances, they still raised a little bit of money, which is, again, insightful and gives you some information. So with that, I think that kind of wraps up questions. If there's a question that you asked and we did not get the chance to answer, please know that somebody from my team will be reaching out to you to help you along. And with that, I want to say thank you very much to both Patrick and Brandy for joining me today. And thank you to our listening audience for sticking around. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, guys.